In the past, I used to look forward to life with purpose of being alive and able to cultivate parami. In recent years, I find myself not taking delight, no spark of joy like before. At the same time, this person is neither happy or depressed about this situation. Just curious if it is nekkhamma. So I think it's a bit more equanimity. And equanimity is a not very well understood quality. Equanimity isn't nothingness, it isn't indifference. Equanimity is sometimes described as equipoise, or staying unwavering. And one of the things Tanajan constantly says with regards to mental cultivation in terms of developing quickly is to train in keeping the mind in the middle, not delighting or falling into delight or the opposite of delight. So not falling into being swayed into liking and disliking, being pleased or displeased. So if we find that there's more kind of ordinariness to life, I think that's actually development. And we can be a bit confused about that, because so much of what we get socialized with in the media is that really living life is about peak experience and lots of experiences. But in Buddhist practice, we're aiming for contentment and well-being and balance as a support for insight. So we actually don't want too much impingement. So is it the beginning of nekkhamma? Possibly. Like not delighting and being excited. There is some renunciation. But I think as I was saying earlier, it's having an adult's perspective about what is actually possible in the world. Or when we're growing up, we're teenagers, we're young adults, we're full of hope. But we don't know yet that even if we get the lover we want, it won't fulfill us completely. We kind of believe it may, because we don't know yet. Or the university course we wanted, or the job we wanted, etc., the car we wanted. But once we've had a few of those things, a few successes, got a few of our wishes, and we begin to realize that even when I get what I want, it doesn't make me very happy. I knew one man who had a Mercedes-Benz, and he said that there were 2 happy days: the day he got it and the day he sold it. He thought he really, really wanted a Mercedes-Benz, but when he had it, he had to worry about it getting scratched and had to take it in to get tuned up and serviced, and repairing was expensive. And so the world of materialism and sensual pleasure is often like that. It doesn't... Lord Buddha describes it, he gives various similes. It's like a dog chewing a blood-smeared bone, never getting any meat. So that's what sensuality is like. It's promising something, but it never delivers quite what we would hope it would. So becoming a little more wise of the limitations of the world. And it doesn't mean that you can't experience well-being, because excitement and enthusiasm doesn't equal well-being. What goes up must come down. I think if a person is generous, you know you're a good person, you know you're an ethical person, you've been generous, so you know you strive to do good, you have a spiritual refuge, you ultimately have a goal that you trust, and you're plodding towards realizing that goal. There's a certain contentment that comes with that, and Lord Buddha praises contentment. Tushita, heaven, so 4 heavens up, is sometimes described as the heaven of the contented. So, and Lord Buddha praises the quality of being content with little. For the monks, he tells them, encourages them, aim to be content with little. So you might not get as much as you got before, but you're more content with it, because you're training in appreciating and knowing the right amount. So it's okay. It's probably a good sign. And the fact that the person says they're neither depressed, they're not particularly depressed or about it either, it suggests to me that there's just more balance. This person has a sensitive mind, dear Ajahn. After transferring merits to all beings, they come to ask for more. So this person is aware of subtle-bodied beings. Is there any way to stop them from coming because it disturbs my sleep? There are too many. So that does happen for some people. I think for people who have that kind of sensitive mind, just as a person might be sensitive to beings in parallel realms, those beings also notice who notices them. You imagine that you want some merit and you might be in an in-between state for a long time and hardly anybody is aware of you. Finally somebody comes along who is aware a little bit and cares and dedicates merit. So such beings may have been hungry or cold and lonely for a long time. So somebody gives them some attention, they want more. Normally I have this issue sometimes, less than before. So what I would do as a general strategy is one does spread metta, one does dedicate merit, one chants the Metta Sutta. That's the appropriate response as a Buddhist, to try to help unseen beings to the degree that we can. But we need our rest, we need our sleep, we want our meditation undisturbed. So there are certain chants that, some chants for spreading metta, but then other chants which are more powerfully protective. So one chant that Tanajananand used to recommend to me was the Jina Banjara Gatha. It's, I think it's probably in this book, the Jina Banjara Gatha. It was a chant that was made famous by a monk in Thailand, Somdet Do. And this is like a Theravadan mandala. It's a very interesting practice. Apparently it originated in a Bayagiri monastery in Sri Lanka. And Somdet Do edited it, made it a little bit shorter. And he did say that if anybody chanted it, he would protect them. And so 3 times. So you spread your metta, dedicate merit, chant the Metta Sutta, and then if you don't want to be bothered anymore, you chant this one 3 times. And in my experience, it works. I was in Rajgir on a pilgrimage in the Indo Hockey Hotel, trying to sleep. 5 black-coloured beings came in and punched me and kicked me. And but what was interesting is the monk in the other bed next to me didn't notice anything. So some people are sensitive and others aren't, but I had to say, "Excuse me, Venerable, I'm going to have to do some chanting now." And I did my 3 Jina Banjaras, and so yes, there are many beings. Dear Ajahn, are you taking any devotees on pilgrimage this year? I have a plan to go next March to Savatthi, Kusinara and Lumbini. Dear Ajahn, in daily life I do the 5 recollections and reflect on the 3 characteristics of life. This has brought a rude sense of vulnerability and fragility of life. It can be quite unsettling. How do I proceed from this sense of vulnerability and fragility? So the 5 reflections: I'm going to age, I'm going to sicken, I'm going to die, all that is mine, beloved and pleasing will be separated, etc. And then there are 3 characteristics: aniccaṅ, aniccaṅ, dukkhaṅ, dukkhaṅ. So the sense of the danger of samsara It's actually Luang Por Chah. If someone, when he was describing what is a bhikkhu he described as someone who sees the danger in samsara. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing, but being paranoid isn't. Luang Por Chah talks about the analogy of sitting in the seat of the mind and that which knows. I had this experience myself, and I was very grateful when I met Thanajananand because he was able to help me. I had this experience of despair and seeing dukkha. Like I would try to meditate and my mind just seemed like it was full of dukkha. And I'd try to make awareness bigger, the dukkha would fill that space. And I'd make awareness bigger and the dukkha would fill that space. And it was just dukkha. Everything was dukkha. And that was in my second pansa. I was practicing in the jungle as I talked, like in Dao Dam. It gets quite dark there quite quickly with these big trees, so you've got these 14 hours of darkness, and every time you meditate it's only dukkha. It wasn't easy, actually. And Luang Por Nan came to Dao Dam, the jungle, during that time, thank goodness. And my concern at the time was I just didn't think I could take it. I just said, I don't know if I can take this. And so I asked him what to do. I was concerned at the time that maybe I didn't have the parami, the requisite virtues to stay a monk and keep contemplating in that way. Maybe the mind wasn't strong enough yet. Or I wanted his advice, and he said, actually, this is normal. He said it's normal, and it's correct progress, because actually everything is dukkha. It's a correct perception. And sometimes the mind will be more sensitive to the aniccaṃ, some people's minds will be more sensitive to the dukkhaṃ. And we have to have the insight into the anatta, the not-self. And then he said something very helpful to me. He said, well, I was exactly the same when I was a young monk. I felt the same. So that was very helpful. And he said, the only way it gets better, he says, what's occurring is the mind has got sensitive to dukkha before the equanimity has developed. But the way the equanimity develops is through patiently enduring. So all you can do is patiently endure. He said it's as though the house is on fire, everything in the house is burning, and you're burning with it. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what it's like. And it was very nice to get that empathy, and he understood what I was experiencing. And he said, it is true, everything's on fire. And with impermanence, with craving, with clinging. He said, but patiently enduring with it, there will come the point where you will be able to rest in the awareness that knows the dukkha. But the only way that develops is through patiently enduring with it. Then he did suggest spreading loving kindness for the first 5 or 10 minutes of every meditation session, every single meditation session. He was saying you need to support the mind in the process of and develop metta and keep patiently enduring, and the equanimity will come. The awareness will get stronger, the mindfulness gets stronger, and the mind will be aware of the dukkha characteristic, but not be completely on fire as well. And in a way, it's like when you meditate, the mind gets more sensitive and the dukkha becomes more obvious. And the answer isn't to stop meditating, the answer is to keep meditating. And but at least knowing that that's the right approach is helpful. Someone who had been through it says, you're right where you need to be, you're on track, just keep going, be patient, and spread loving kindness to yourself to support the process. May I know how nibbida and viraga are supposed to feel like a not feeling of despair. So sometimes it does feel like despair. And but when it's mature, when nibbida is mature, and the sense of weariness about the conditions that are not satisfying, which are bound up with dukkha, when the meditation matures, the weariness itself helps the mind to find a quiet, peaceful place. So it's sobering. is one way I would describe it. It's sobering. And sobriety is a beautiful quality, actually. It's clarity, stillness, centeredness. There's another phrase in Thai, sulot samve, is spiritual sadness. I remember when I was, again, practicing at Thanajan's, I think that was, second year. I was having this experience where the mind would just get so sad. It was like, it was as big as the sky, and it was just sadness. And I'd begun to wonder, do I need some medication? Because this is a lot of sadness. But what I noticed was there was a peaceful quality to it. So I asked Thanajan, and he says, actually this is one of the forms of rapture. One of the forms of rapture has a sad quality to it. It's a kind of a spiritual sadness, sulot sanved. And again, just having a teacher that said, it's okay, this is wholesome. Because I wasn't feeling sad as an individual, it's just that when I meditated, there was sadness as big as the sky. And I don't know about you, but if you've looked at samsara lately, it is kind of a sad place. So again, it's like the mind is recognizing there's all this association with the dislike, separation from the light, aging, sickness and death, war, famine, poverty, all of that. And once Thanajan told me to trust it, it was wholesome. What the experience was like was the sadness was so big the sense of self would fall away. There was nowhere for it to hide in a way, or there was nothing to hang on to, everything hurt. And so there was just this cool quality of sadness. And it was actually very peaceful. And as soon as I learned how to meditate with it and learned to kind of enjoy it, it stopped happening. Often that happened, the mind changes, the various dharmas that are ripening in the mind and the karmas that are ripening are changing. And I think one of the things that happens when you're a monk is if you keep virtue for a long time, Luang Por Chah says this, you get the happiness that comes from having been virtue, it creates a certain type of merit, and then you get like a deva-like happiness, and well-being becomes quite resilient in the heart. And so once that started happening, Luang Por Anand said for Thai monks it takes about 3 years, for Western monks it takes 5 years for the well-being to become consistent and stable. So with that consistent and stable well-being, the sadness didn't come around so often. But it was an interesting experience. You keep trying to come inwards. So I like to observe the breath in this area. And so when things are dukkha, okay, let go, let go, let go, let go as much as you can. Stay still, stay quiet, stay in your center, come in as deep as you can. And then that becomes a kind of a samadhi, becomes very peaceful, because the mind isn't going out and isn't moving. And so we have to use the weariness to bring us further inwards. We have to use the sobriety to make us further centered. And then when we read the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta tomorrow, the last paragraph, I'll read it now. Because, it sounds depressing, doesn't it? Weariness, sadness, dispassion. But listen to the next word. Seeing in this way, bhikkhus, the wise noble disciple becomes disenchanted with form, disenchanted with feeling, disenchanted with perception, disenchanted with mental formations, disenchanted with consciousness. Becoming disenchanted, their passions fade away. So this is what we don't see. When we're weary and dispassionate, we're not feeding craving for, craving not for, and craving for becoming. The mind is letting go of its flowing out into craving. That's a very good thing. It's coming inward. Becoming disenchanted, their passions fade away. With the fading of passions, the heart is liberated. So it's an important part of the process to understand. And listening to this sermon, the hearts of the 5 bhikkhus were liberated. I find that paragraph very helpful, very instructive, very instrumental, because oftentimes we can have an assumption that Buddha's practice will make us happier and happier and happier, and then you're an arahant. And it's not about happiness. It's about peace. And contentment, well-being, keeping the mind in the middle, equanimity, equipoise, ultimately liberation. And there is a lot of tranquility, there is a lot of serenity, there is meditative rapture. But it's not happiness. But Lord Buddha does say that "Pen kwam sukh pranit thi sut." Lord Buddha says peacefulness is the most refined pleasure. So that's interesting. He does say that it's pleasure, it is pleasant. Kwam sangop pen kwam sukh pranit thi sut. Peacefulness is the most refined pleasure. So it's not that there isn't pleasure. So yes, be informed by the weariness. The world is a wearying place. Come inward, come inward, come inward. The mind will get cooler, more and more tranquil, more and more serene, more and more rapturous, more and more peaceful. Dear Ajahn, how does one handle remorse? I noticed it impacts on the quality of the meditation. This is part of the karma of doing bad things or unskillful things. If you did do the unskillful thing, you will feel remorse. And then there's one has to forgive oneself. And sometimes even if you forgive yourself, it doesn't mean the remorse will go away, or a sense of conscience. If it was bad, it was bad. If it was unskillful, it was unskillful. Conscience is a good thing. And but sometimes you have to have a bit of a conversation with it. It was like, I was acting under the influence of greed, hatred, and delusion. Yeah, I wasn't as mindful as I might have hoped. And I made some mistakes. I acknowledge the mistake, and I forgive myself. And I set the determination to try not to do it again, to behave better. And it's a process. The remorse in general, if you it kind of flows through the mind in meditation, and at a certain point it's kind of like you felt bad about this for long enough now. You can put this down. And forgiveness is usually sought from someone who is alive. How does one seek forgiveness from someone who has passed away? I think you can make merit, or you can have your meditation and you can dedicate merit and you can ask forgiveness. And whether they do or not, sometimes we can't know. But just doing that, I think, makes us feel better. And producing the merit, dedicating the merit to that being wherever they are. We know we've done something in terms of like a compensatory gesture. We're trying to make up for it. And I've had discussions with people who've said that it does feel better than doing nothing. It's like, do good things in their name, say sorry, and dedicate merit to them. And ultimately we have to forgive ourselves, and the process of forgiveness is then we also set the intention to do better. So it's a training. We're training in refining and purifying our virtue. We were talking last night about Sumedha, who was already incredibly gifted, talented, virtuous, amazing sila and samadhi already. But it's interesting to consider that, a couple of million lives before that, he was an ordinary being. And so it's an interesting thing to consider that every single Buddha has been an ordinary worldly being at some point in their samsaric history. So that is the starting point. And I think that's really heartening. That's one of the things I love about the Buddha's teaching and Buddha's practice is there's nothing inherently evil. It's the thing about anicca and anatta. There's nothing inherently evil in anyone like that's permanent. Nobody. We were considering the other day that Mahamoggallana had been Mara once, and then became chief disciple of the Buddha. That Devadatta, currently in hell, will be a Pacceka Buddha. It's being recycled according to karma. So, however bad a thing you did that you feel remorse about, or that you want to ask forgiveness for, the previous Buddhas did it too, a long time ago. And sometimes it's nice to think that way, that we all start from being a little lotus bud in the mud. That's our starting point. We can't see clearly, so we do make mistakes. When at a certain point, we start to learn from our mistakes. We notice it feels better to be good, and we start cultivating goodness. So we start where we are, we work where we are, keep trying to do better. On a similar subject, when one practices and contemplates the three characteristics, anicca, dukkha and anatta, the mind develops nibbida, weariness, and hopefully from there, viraga, dispassion, leading to vimutti, liberation. One question: how does the process work in the case when one practices metta? Just as I was explaining, most people don't have enough samadhi and enough clarity to just take the bitter medicine only. If you're contemplating in ways that give rise to nibbida, weariness, but you're not yet, it's like those 5 bhikkhus, they were ready to hear it. And they had vast accumulated merits and virtue. So they went from nibbida to dispassion to liberation. For most people, it's a longer process. And we need to support, like Ajahn directly told me, someone who was liberated, I believe, directly told me, start with metta every session. Then, and he's explained that loving kindness supports the development of mindfulness because qualities like anger and irritation, impatience, holding grudges, that darkens our mindfulness. Metta brightens our minds and lessens those darkening qualities, so then the mindfulness gets better. So in terms of taking metta as the vehicle for liberation, that seems to be a practice for very refined characters. And in the last couple of centuries, from what I can gather, most people have done it through body contemplation. And most of the arahants, seems like body contemplation was their main mode of stream entry and finishing off, at least in the Thai forest tradition that I'm aware of. But in theory, and I asked Ajahn this, and he said he's the one that told me this is the case, that if a person has a sharp enough mindfulness and is contemplating the impermanence of phenomenon, as the mind comes out of the metta jhana into the upajjhara state, neighborhood concentration, and then that upajjhara becomes from refined to intermediate to coarse upajjhara. The practitioner with really good mindfulness notices the changing and the cessation of those samadhi states and can be liberated with the insight of impermanence into the samadhi state. And Lord Buddha did praise that as the most beautiful form of liberation, because the mind goes from bright and full of love to pure, bright and pure and transparent. But it's for very refined characters. Be a nice way to become enlightened, wouldn't it? Come out of the metta jhana and Ajahn, I had a very unusual experience while doing walking meditation. I saw small lights sparkling on the tile floor, moving like waves in the sea. What does it mean? I don't know. So some people are more prone to subtle visual phenomenon than others. And I think one of the most important things to learn whenever these things occur is to try not to be too fascinated and to try not to wonder too much about it afterwards. And basically it's a visual consciousness, but it's more subtle visual consciousness. So these monks that have what they call datip, the purified divine eye, it's still, if I've understood correctly, it's still eye consciousness, but it's a more subtle eye. It's the mind's eye. Just as devas can see, devas have eye consciousness as well. And they have more subtle eyes. And but just as if you're walking meditation, and in the forest tradition we practice walking and sitting. And so if you're on your walking path and a bird flies by, you don't go, "Oh, what kind of bird is that?" Which we train in looking 2 meters or 3 meters in front of us and keeping down. And whatever bird flies by, we have the bird. Noting. We don't do get the binoculars, what color is it? Where's it migrating from? Or, there's one monk in my monastery that does do bird watching, but anyway. While doing walking meditation, we're just aware of, if a leaf falls, one is just aware a leaf fell. But one is feeling the feelings at the bottom of one's feet. So it's probably a good sign that the mind gets more subtle and starts to experience more subtle phenomenon. But becoming fascinated with them is kind of it's a distraction. And if you have the propensity to see more subtle visual phenomenon, the more you practice, you'll see more, and then you'll become somewhat accustomed to it, and you'll see the ordinariness of it. And it's still seeing nature, it's just seeing a more subtle level of nature. And basically there are nagas in rivers, in the ocean, in ponds, in artesian basins under the ground. There are devas in trees, everywhere. And people think it's really exciting if you see nagas. Maybe there's more nagas than human beings, you know. It's not that exciting to a naga. See nagas every day. So yeah, there's Bumma Devas. We do the chanting in the Dhammacakka. Bumma Deva Nang Sada Manusa Ve. So the Bumma Devas shouted up to the Dawatingsa Devas. The Dawatingsa Devas shouted up to the Yama Devas. So in Thailand they have these little houses with little people that they offer flowers to. Basically they understand that there are beings that look just like humans on a parallel realm in the same place that their house is. So they make offerings to them. And even if they don't see them, they kind of say, "I'm going to the temple to make merit, you can come if you want to." I know people who do that. And keep an eye on the house, you know. So yeah, it might have been a naga, if it's rippling like a wave. If it's sparkling, some of them have sparkly scales. But it might not have been. But if you keep meditating, you get more ability, you'll see. Dear Ajahn, how do I overcome the habit of prioritizing others' needs more than mine? Putting aside my own needs. I don't know. For me it's usually exhaustion. Exhaustion is what helps me prioritize my own needs. I used to find it really difficult to say no. It's a new habit, and now I find it easier. No. Sometimes I say no and I go back and think about it and call back, oh, okay. Sometimes you say no first and go back and have a nap and wake up, feel okay. Yeah, okay, I can do that. Yeah. We do need to take care of ourselves. And some people, you know, it might be the result of lifetimes of being kind and generous and developing metta, is that we do have that tendency to want to help others. And I'm not entirely sure. All I can say that in my life, exhaustion helped. Exhaustion helped me find the point where I would say no. Okay, so I've been talking for half an hour and I want you to have a focus on meditation, so we will leave the last 5 until tomorrow, okay?